The delicate notes of a guzheng mingled with laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. It was the 60th birthday banquet for my father-in-law, Professor Zhao Haishan, a titan in the world of classical Chinese literature studies. His ancient villa, nestled in Shanghai's former French concession, was a place where every brick could tell a story. Tonight, the story about to be told would be darker than anyone could imagine. I stood in a corner, nursing a glass of lukewarm champagne. I, Li Wei, an AI ethics specialist, always felt out of place amidst conversations about Tang poetry and Song dynasty prose. My wife, Anran, glowed beside her father, her eyes sparkling with pride. To her, her father was a living saint, a man of impeccable intellect and character. I used to believe that too. Used to. "If I may have everyone's attention," Professor Zhao's voice boomed, warm yet commanding. The room fell silent instantly. He stood on a small dais, microphone in hand, his usual benevolent smile tinged with something strange. "Today, on this joyous occasion, I must share some sad news. Terribly painful news." A hush fell over the room. Anran looked at her father with concern. "The manuscript that represents my life's work," he continued, his voice beginning to tremble. "My research on the poetics of the Southern Song dynasty, which I plan to publish next month, has vanished." A collective gasp swept through the room. I felt my heart skip a beat. "It has been stolen," he said, his voice hardening. "The only digital copy was taken from my personal computer. A despicable act of sabotage meant to destroy my legacy." Anran moved to comfort him, but he held up a hand. His eyes, sharp as a scalpel, scanned the crowd and then locked onto mine. A deathly silence descended. Every gaze in the room followed his and fell upon me. "The thief," Professor Zhao said, his voice clear and cold, "is no stranger. It is someone with the technical skills to bypass any security, someone with access to this house. Someone I trusted like my own son." He slowly raised his index finger, and its tip aimed directly at my chest. "It is Li Wei, my son-in-law." My world shattered. The champagne in my glass seemed to scream. Anran stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief and confusion. "Father, what are you saying?" she stammered. "I have proof," Professor Zhao declared. "A few moments ago, on a hunch, I checked Li Wei's laptop, which he left in my study, and I found it. An encrypted version of the manuscript, hidden in a secret folder. It was a blatant lie. I had never touched his computer. My own laptop was in my briefcase, secured by facial recognition. But the truth no longer mattered. The entire room was looking at me like I was a monster, a traitor. "I didn't do it," I said, but my voice was lost in a sea of accusatory whispers. Professor Zhao shook his head, his expression one of perfect agony. "I didn't want to believe it, Wei, but the evidence is undeniable. You were jealous of me, you scorned my work. You wanted to ruin me." He pulled out his phone. "I'm sorry, Anran. I have no other choice." Everyone held their breath as he dialed. "Hello. Is this the Pudong police station? My name is Zhao Haishan. I wish to report a theft of intellectual property at my private residence." Anran burst into tears. The performance had reached its climax. He had calculated everything. The public accusation, the fabricated evidence, the call to the police. All designed to utterly destroy me, leaving me no way out. But he had made one mistake. He had underestimated me. He thought I was just a dry engineer, a naive fool easily crushed by his complex social machinations. He didn't know that, for the past few months, I had been quietly preparing for a battle just like this one. As everyone waited for the police to arrive and handcuff me, I took a deep breath. I didn't look at Anran, nor at my father-in-law. I looked at my phone. "Professor," I said, my voice unnervingly calm, which startled everyone. "Are you certain about what you just said?" "How dare you ask?" an elderly guest growled. I held up a hand, asking for silence. "Because every word spoken in this room tonight, especially yours, has been recorded and analyzed." I unlocked my phone and connected it to a small portable speaker in my pocket. A complex interface appeared on the screen. "This is Veritas, a personal AI software I'm developing. It doesn't just record. It analyzes 37 parameters of the human voice, including pitch, speed, and micropauses, and compares them against a database of deceptive speech patterns." I rewound the recording to the moment Professor Zhao began his speech. His voice filled the room again, but this time, it was accompanied by beeps and a synthesized machine voice. "The manuscript that represents my life's work has vanished." The machine voice intoned, "Analysis. Pitch increased by 0.12 semitones. Speech rate decreased by 7%. Artificial hesitation detected. Probability of deception, 89%. The room was dead silent. Professor Zhao's face turned pale. It has been stolen. By Li Wei, my son-in-law. The machine voice spoke coldly. Analysis. No physiological indicators of grief or anger detected. Micro. Expressions of satisfaction and calculation identified via vocal frequency analysis. Probability of deception, 98.7%. I turned off the recording. The software is still in beta, I said, looking directly into my father-in-law's eyes, which were now filled not with benevolence but with sheer horror and hatred. But it's rarely this wrong. The police are on their way. Perhaps they'll want to hear this tape. And perhaps they'll also want to investigate how the proof on my laptop was created, and by whom. His phone call had been a knife, but I had just turned it into a double-edged sword, and the sharper edge was now pointed directly at his throat. The banquet was over, but our war had just begun. 2 police officers arrived, one old and one young, looking bewildered as they walked into what should have been a birthday party but felt like an interrogation room. Professor Zhao, the master dramatist, quickly regained his composure. He insisted that I had used dark technology to manipulate the recording, that I was a dangerous individual capable of twisting the truth. He emphasized the evidence on my laptop. They asked to see the device. I calmly opened my briefcase, placed it on the table, and unlocked it with my face. Be my guest, I said. Please check the access logs and file creation times. You'll find that file was created within the last hour, while I was in the sight of at least 20 people. The younger officer, more tech-savvy, went to work. The older one looked from me to Professor Zhao, his eyes filled with doubt. Their initial certainty had evaporated, replaced by awkwardness. This was no longer a simple theft. It was a complex family mess, wrapped in accusations and high technology. Finally, after nearly an hour of checks and preliminary statements, they concluded there was insufficient evidence to arrest me. The file had indeed been created recently, but they couldn't immediately determine who had created it. They confiscated both my laptop and Professor Zhao's computer for further investigation. We'll be in touch, the older officer said, his tone suggesting he just wanted to get out of there. As they left, the last of the guests hurried away, none daring to make eye contact. They fled the house as if escaping a plague. Only the 3 of us remained in the heavy silence of the opulent living room, which now looked like a battlefield. Professor Zhao collapsed onto the sofa, breathing heavily. He didn't look at me, only at Anran, his expression one of profound sorrow. Anran, you see? He used those tricks against me. He's trying to tear us apart. Anran stood between us, trembling. She looked at me, her red-rimmed eyes filled with a question she didn't dare ask. What did you do? Anran, I began softly. You know I would never do that. But, that software? She asked, her voice faltering. Why were you recording my father? Why were you so prepared? It feels like you were waiting for this. Her words were a knife twist. It was true that I had been prepared. For months, I had noticed Professor Zhao's increasingly cutting remarks and veiled criticisms. I had sensed a storm was coming. Veritas was my umbrella. But how could I explain that without sounding like a paranoid neurotic? I just wanted to protect myself, Anran, I said. Your father, he isn't always who you think he island. Enough, Professor Zhao roared, jumping to his feet. You will not speak about me like that in front of my daughter. You are a liar, a venomous snake we have welcomed into our home. Then let's talk about the truth, I challenged. The truth about that manuscript. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes before being extinguished by rage. The truth is that you stole it, and you will pay for it. Dad, Anran cried, tears streaming down her face. Stop it. Both of you, just stop it. She fled the room, her sobs echoing from the staircase. I wanted to follow her, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The battle was no longer just between him and me. It had dragged Anran in, tearing her in two. The ride back to our apartment was silent, a silence that was worse than screaming. Anran stared out the window, the neon lights of Shanghai flashing across her face like ghosts. I knew what she was thinking. She was weighing the scales. On one side, the father she had worshipped her entire life. On the other, the husband she loved, who was now acting in a way that was secretive and frightening. When we got home, she went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. I stood alone in the dark living room, feeling a profound loneliness. Veritas had saved me from being arrested, but it had also dug a deep chasm between me and the woman I loved. I had won the first battle, but I was in danger of losing the war. I sat down and opened my tablet. The police investigation would take time. I couldn't wait. If Professor Zhao had dared to do this so publicly, he must have something immense to hide. That manuscript. It was the key. I started typing. My father-in-law's name, the title of his research, and the vague keywords I had once heard him mutter when he thought no one was listening. Chen Kai, legacy, a debt. I knew I was stepping into deep, dangerous waters, but now, there was no turning back. I had to find the truth, not just to clear my name, but to save my marriage. I had to show Ayn Rand that I wasn't the monster. The real monster was the man she had always called father. The police found nothing. As I had predicted, there was no trace of me accessing Professor Zhao's computer, and the digital footprint of the fake file on my laptop was ambiguous, suggesting it could have been planted by an external device. The case was suspended due to a lack of conclusive evidence. My laptop was returned, and I thought the nightmare was over. I was naive. Professor Zhao didn't need the police to destroy me. He had a far more powerful weapon, his reputation, and his network. The campaign began quietly. First came the whispers. At the Shanghai Institute of Technology where I worked, I started noticing strange looks. Colleagues stopped inviting me to lunch. In meetings, an awkward silence would fall when I spoke. I was an AI ethics specialist, a field that demands absolute trust. Now, a cloud of suspicion hung over me. Then an anonymous article appeared on a little-known academic blog. It didn't mention my name, but it described in vivid detail a young tech expert in Shanghai who used his skills to slander and manipulate his own respected father-in-law during a family dispute. It painted a picture of an unstable, jealous psychopath willing to distort reality with technology. The author claimed to be a friend of the family, concerned for the safety of the elderly professor. I knew instantly who was behind it. It was Zhao Haishan's style, striking from the shadows, using eloquent words to conceal his venom. The consequences were almost immediate. The major project I was leading, a contract with the city government to build an ethical framework for public surveillance systems, was abruptly put on hold for review. My department head called me into his office, his face full of regret. "Li Wei," he said, avoiding my eyes. "There are rumors. We need to ensure that every member of the project has a flawless reputation. You understand, don't you?" I understood. I was out. The storm hit Anran too. At the hospital, colleagues began asking her questions with false sympathy. "Anran, are you okay? I heard your family is going through something." Every inquiry was a needle prick to her pain. She came home each evening exhausted, and the distance between us grew wider. "Do you see?" she said to me one night, her voice filled with desperation. "My father's reputation, and ours, is being destroyed, all because of your stubbornness. Why can't you just go to him and talk? Admit there was a misunderstanding. Apologize." "Apologize for what, Ayn Rand?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "For not letting him successfully frame me? For defending myself?" "I don't know anymore," she shouted, her eyes brimming with tears. "I just know that my world is falling apart. My father is suffering, and my husband insists on waging a war." That night, she slept in the living room. I lay alone in our bed, staring at the dark ceiling. I realized that Zhao Haishan was playing a more sophisticated game than I had imagined. He wasn't just attacking my career, he was attacking the very foundation of my marriage. He was isolating me, turning me into the enemy in my own wife's eyes. If I did nothing, I would lose everything. The next morning, I decided to fight back. I couldn't combat whispers and rumors. I had only one weapon: data. I began a digital investigation into Zhao Haishan. This wasn't hacking. It was meticulous, archaeological work. I gathered every paper he had written, every interview he had given, every social media post, everything public. I fed it all into a semantic analysis program I had written myself. I was looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything out of the ordinary, and I found it. A small but strange detail. In all his academic work spanning 30 years, there was an abrupt shift in his writing style. About 25 years ago, his prose went from being fairly standard and somewhat dry to suddenly becoming brilliant, insightful, and deeply poetic. The change coincided with the publication of his first major book, the one that launched him into the top tier of scholars. The book was titled Echoes of the Past. More importantly, I found a series of old emails from a digitized university archive. They were exchanges between Zhao Haishan and someone named Chen Kai, who was also a graduate student at the time. The content was mostly academic, but the tone was always that of Chen Kai as the guide, the one providing the breakthrough ideas, while Zhao Haishan was merely the respondent. Then, suddenly, the email chain stopped. I searched for the name Chen Kai online. A brief obituary appeared. Chen Kai, a brilliant graduate student, had died in a car accident 25 years ago, just a few months before Zhao Haishan's Echoes of the Past was published. My heart pounded. This was it. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a trail. A dark trail leading back into my father-in-law's past, and I was certain that at the end of it, I would find the truth about the manuscript on Southern Song Poetics and the reason he was so desperate to protect it. The Whisper campaign was over. It was time for me to make the ghosts of the past speak. The name Chen Kai haunted me. I felt like a detective on the trail of a ghost. I needed to know more, but public information about him was scarce. The obituary only mentioned he was a promising young talent, with no mention of a wife, children, or immediate family. I returned to the university's email archive. This time, I wasn't just looking for conversations. I searched for attachments, code snippets, anything unusual, and I found a treasure. In an old email Zhao Haishan had sent to Chen Kai, there was an encrypted zip file titled Backup Notes. What was the password? I tried everything. Their birth dates, the university's name, literary terms, all failed. This was where my skills came into play. I didn't need to brute force it. I needed a logical key. I remembered my father-in-law's muttered words, legacy, a debt. In his emails, Chen Kai often signed off with a line from a classical poem. I recognized it as a line from Bai Juyi's Song of the Pipa. I tried the first 4 letters of that line as the password. The file unzipped. Inside were not manuscripts, but a series of research notes, fragmented paragraphs, and a personal journal file belonging to Chen Kai. I started reading, and a cold chill ran down my spine. Chen Kai's journal painted a completely different picture of his best friend, Zhao Haishan. They were once partners, but Chen Kai's talent far outshone his friend's. It was Chen Kai who was developing the groundbreaking theories on Southern Song Poetics, while Haishan was merely a listener and a note-taker. Chen Kai wrote about a growing jealousy in his friend's eyes, about how Haishan began subtly co-opting his ideas. Haishan seems to have no voice of his own, one entry read. He is a perfect mirror, reflecting my own thoughts back at me, but adding a touch of his own ambition. Sometimes, I am frightened when I look in that mirror. But the most horrifying detail was in the final pages. Chen Kai had just completed the first draft of his life's work. He had given it to Zhao Haishan to read and give feedback, trusting his only friend. That was 1 week before he died in the car accident. The accident was ruled to be the result of drunk driving. There was no proof that Haishan was involved in the death. But the coincidence was monstrous. A genius dies young. A manuscript disappears. And an ambitious friend suddenly rises to academic stardom with a work written in a style identical to the deceased. I sat staring at the screen, stunned. This was no longer a simple case of plagiarism. This was a crime that had been buried for a quarter of a century. The Poetics of the Southern Song Dynasty manuscript that Professor Zhao was working on wasn't a new project. It was the sequel, the completion of the legacy he had stolen from his dead friend. That was why he was so panicked. He was afraid that one day, the truth would come out. Perhaps he suspected that I, with my technical skills, might uncover something. The accusation at the banquet wasn't just an attack. It was a preemptive strike. He wanted to destroy my credibility before I had a chance to say anything. I saved all the files onto a multi-layered encrypted hard drive. This was my ammunition, but I had to use it carefully. If I released it hastily, he would just claim I had used my skills to fabricate evidence. More importantly, I had to think of Anran. This discovery would destroy not only her father, but her entire world. I needed a witness, someone who could corroborate what I had found. The obituary said Chen Kai had no family, but that was 25 years ago. Things could change. I started another search, this time for people with the surname Chen who had lived in the university area at that time. I went through old directories, local archives. After hours of searching, I found a name. Chen Ming, a son, born just a few months before Chen Kai's death, whose mother had taken him back to her hometown after the tragedy. His current address, a small city a few hours away from Shanghai by train. I booked a train ticket for the next morning. I was going to see Chen Ming. The digital ghost had shown me the way. Now it was time to find a living voice to make the truth heard. I glanced towards the closed bedroom door. I was doing this for myself, but also for Ayn Rand. She deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful. She deserved to be free from a legacy built on lies. Before I left, I knew I had to talk to Ayn Rand. Acting secretly behind her back would only deepen the crack between us. I knocked on the bedroom door. After a moment, she opened it, her face gaunt from lack of sleep. "We need to talk," I said softly. She didn't invite me in, just stood leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed. "If it's about my father again, I don't want to hear it." "Ayn Rand, it's more than just about your father. It's about the truth." I decided to take a risk. I showed her my tablet, displaying a page from Chen Kai's journal, the entry about Zhao Haishan's jealousy. I said nothing, just let her read. She glanced at the text, initially dismissive, then her brow furrowed. "Who is Chen Kai, and how did you get this?" "He was your father's old classmate. I found it in a university archive." "Ayn Rand, your father hasn't been honest with us. There are secrets in his past." "Stop it, Li Wei," she interrupted, her voice trembling with anger. "What are you doing? Digging up my father's past? Using these unverified texts to condemn him? This is exactly what he said you would do. You're obsessed. You're using technology to create your own narrative." "This isn't a narrative I created. This is the truth." "Your truth," she shot back. "My truth is that my father is collapsing. He was hospitalized 2 days ago for high blood pressure. My mother called me, sobbing. He has spent his entire life building his reputation, and now you are trying to destroy it with this stuff." My heart sank. Hospitalized. It was a masterful move on his part. It garnered sympathy, made Ayn Rand feel guilty, and further cast me as the villain. "Ayn Rand, I'm sorry about his health," I said, my voice sincere. "But you have to believe me. He is manipulating all of us." "I don't know what to believe anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I just know that my life is being torn apart. I love you, Li Wei, I do. But I also love my father. Why are you making me choose?" "I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to see the truth." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Maybe your truth isn't something I want to know. I'm so tired. Just end this way. Go to my father, say you're sorry, even if you're not. Let things go back to how they were." "I can't," I said, my voice firm. "If I do that, I'm admitting guilt. I'm letting him win. I'll lose my career, my honor, and most importantly, we will live the rest of our lives in a lie." Ayn Rand looked at me, and the anguish in her eyes turned to ice. It was a look of profound disappointment. "Then you choose," she said, her voice flat, "between your war and our marriage." She slammed the door in my face. The wall of silence between us had just become a wall of cold, hard brick. I stood there for a long time, the bitter taste of failure in my mouth. I had hoped the evidence would at least make her think, but I had forgotten. Her faith in her father wasn't built on logic. It was built on 30 years of love and worship. To break it, I needed more than digital ghosts. I turned away and picked up my packed backpack. Ayn Rand's words echoed in my head. "You choose." I had already chosen. I was choosing both. I would fight this war, and I would fight to win my wife back. As I walked out the door, I knew my trip to see Chen Ming wasn't just about finding a witness. It was about finding a key, one strong enough to break down the wall that Zhao Haishan had built around Ayn Rand's heart. I had to succeed. Because if I failed, I wouldn't just lose my integrity. I would lose the only woman I had ever loved. The small city where Chen Ming lived was a stark contrast to Shanghai. No skyscrapers, no neon glare, just quiet streets and a slower pace of life. I found his address, a small electronics repair shop tucked away on a main street. Chen Ming was a man in his late 20s, thin and wearing thick glasses. He looked at me with suspicion when I introduced myself as an independent researcher looking into his father's work. "My father?" he said, surprised. "He passed away a long time ago. Almost no one remembers him." "I do," I said. "I believe he was a brilliant scholar, and his work was not given the credit it deserved." The suspicion in his eyes softened slightly, replaced by curiosity. I didn't rush in with accusations. I started by asking about his father, about his memories. "I don't have many," Ming said, his voice quiet. "I was too young when he died. My mother rarely spoke of him. She said the pain was too great. We talked for a long time. I told him what I had read in the emails, about his father's intelligence and passion. Gradually, he opened up. My mother always said my father had a best friend at university," Ming recalled. "Professor Zhao Haishan. He even came to the funeral and sent money to help us for the first few years. My mother was always grateful to him. Did he ever talk about your father's work? I asked. Ming shook his head, numbered just that it was a great loss to the academic world. Later, when Professor Zhao became famous, my mother even bought his books. She said his writing style felt familiar, a lot like my father's. This was it. Ming, I said, my voice serious. The reason I'm here isn't just for research. I believe that Professor Zhao's most famous work, the book that made his name, was actually written by your father. Chen Ming stared at me, stunned. What are you saying? That's impossible. I took out my tablet and showed him everything. The emails. His father's journal. The preliminary stylistic comparison I had done. I told him about Professor Zhao's accusation against me, and my belief that it was all a smokescreen to hide a much larger secret. Ming read every line, his expression shifting from disbelief to shock, and then to anger. He recognized his father's handwriting in the scanned journal pages. He recognized the ideas that his mother had vaguely recounted. I can't believe it, he stammered, his hands trembling. He's been living on my father's reputation all these years? I believe so, I confirmed, and now he's trying to write the sequel. I need your help, Ming. Do you have anything of your father's? Notebooks, notes, anything that could prove this? Ming was silent for a long moment, seemingly wrestling with the terrible truth that had just been revealed. Then he stood up. Follow me. He led me to a small room at the back of the shop. On a dusty old shelf sat a wooden chest. He opened it. Inside were yellowed notebooks and thick stacks of paper filled with notes. My mother kept everything, Ming said, his voice thick with emotion. She said this was the only thing she had left of him. I never really read them. Too much academic jargon. I carefully picked up one of the notebooks. Inside were dense notes, complex diagrams, and insightful analyses of Southern song poetics. These weren't just scattered ideas. This was the foundation, the very skeleton of the entire body of work that Zhao Haishan had claimed as his own. This is it, I said, my voice filled with excitement. Ming, this is undeniable proof. Chen Ming looked at his father's relics, then at me. The hesitation in his eyes was gone, replaced by a flame of determination. Professor Zhao owes my father and me an explanation. More than that, he owes my father the truth. He took a deep breath. I'll help you. What do we need to do? I looked at the stacks of notebooks. With these and with my technology, I could do more than just prove Zhao Haishan was a liar. I could reconstruct Chen Kai's true legacy. First, I said, we're going to digitize all of this. Then, I'm going to let my AI do its work. We're not just going to expose a lie. We're going to give a genius back his name. Leaving Ming's shop that day, I no longer felt alone. I had an ally. And more importantly, I had the voice of the past on my side. This was no longer just my fight. It was a fight for justice for Chen Kai. Back in Shanghai, I worked with an obsessive focus. Ming and I took turns carefully scanning every single one of the thousands of pages of Chen Kai's notes. It was time-consuming, but each digitized page felt like a recovered piece of the truth. Once everything was on my computer, I began the most critical phase. I would use a field of AI called stylometry. Essentially, every writer has a unique linguistic fingerprint, made up of unconscious choices in sentence length, the frequency of certain words, grammatical structures, and hundreds of other variables. This fingerprint is almost impossible to fake consistently. I had built an algorithm for this purpose. I fed the system 3 sets of data. Set A: all of Zhao Haishan's published works from before Chen Kai's death. Set B: all of Zhao Haishan's published works from after Chen Kai's death, including the famous echoes of the past. Set C: the entirety of Chen Kai's digitized notes, notebooks, and journals. I also included excerpts from the new poetics of the Southern Song Dynasty manuscript that Professor Zhao had published in a few academic journals for promotion. This was the target for analysis. I ran the algorithm. My powerful computer began processing millions of data points. On the screen, complex graphs and word networks began to form. I felt like a sorcerer waiting for a powerful spell to take effect. Anran still wasn't speaking to me, but I knew this result would be the only thing that could break that silence. Hours later, the program signaled its completion. I opened the results file, my heart pounding. The conclusion was terrifyingly clear. The analysis graph showed that Set A, Haishan's original style, and Set B, his later style, were 2 completely separate clusters. They looked like the work of 2 different people. His original style was simple, repetitive, and lacked nuance. His later style was complex, rich in imagery, and profound. But the most damning part was the comparison with Set C. The graph showed that Set B and Set C were almost perfectly overlapping. The linguistic fingerprint in Zhao Haishan's famous works and in Chen Kai's notes had a similarity score of 96.4%. In this field, that was an irrefutable number. And finally, the excerpts from the newest manuscript. The algorithm placed them definitively within the cluster of Set B and Set C. I had it. Mathematical, objective proof that couldn't be dismissed as faked or manipulated. This was a scientific verdict. Zhao Haishan hadn't just stolen Chen Kai's work once. He had been living off that legacy, mimicking that style, and was now trying to squeeze it dry one last time. I called Chen Ming. "We have it," I said, unable to hide the excitement in my voice. The final proof. I sent him the analysis report. He was silent on the other end for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was choked with emotion. "So, the world has been praising him for my father's thoughts. Now we can fix that," I said. "But how?" I was at a crossroads. Option 1. Go public. Send this report to the media, the university, the publisher. Zhao Haishan would be utterly destroyed. His career would collapse. His reputation would turn to dust. Justice for Chen Kai would be served in the fullest sense. But the cost would be An Ran. She would be destroyed along with her father. The news of such a massive academic scandal would follow her for the rest of her life. Option 2. A private confrontation. Use this evidence as the ultimate weapon to force Zhao Haishan to surrender. Force him to withdraw the manuscript, admit the truth in silence, and compensate Chen Ming's family. This would protect An Ran from public humiliation, but justice for Chen Kai would be incomplete. The world would never know his genius. I looked at the screen, where the complex graphs proved a decades-long lie. I thought of An Ran's anguished face, and of Chen Ming's determined one. I knew what I had to do. This would not be a noisy assault. This would be a precise surgical operation. I would not destroy Zhao Haishan. I would force him to bury his own fraudulent legacy with his own hands. I composed a short email to my father-in-law's private address. Subject: Linguistic fingerprint. Body: Professor, I have some very interesting data analysis that I believe you will want to see. We need to talk. In private, let me know a time and place. I attached a single page from the report, the graph showing the stylistic overlap between his work and Chen Kai's. No explanation was needed. The graph itself was a declaration of war. I hit send. The bullet had been fired. Now, I just had to wait for the wounded beast to respond. The silence from Zhao Haishan's end lasted exactly 24 hours. It was a tense silence, during which I could picture him pacing his study, trying to find an escape route only to realize every path was blocked. Then, the reply came. It was terrifyingly brief. Old Tree Tea House. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Come alone. He had chosen the location. A quiet tea house frequented by Shanghai's intellectual elite. A public place, yet private enough. A clever choice. He wanted to ensure I wouldn't do anything drastic. The next evening I arrived on time. The tea house smelled of sandalwood and pu'er tea. Zhao Haishan was already seated in a private room, sectioned off by intricately carved wooden screens. He looked 10 years older. His usual dignified air was gone, replaced by exhaustion and deep-set, hollow eyes. He didn't invite me to sit, nor did he order tea. He just stared at me. "What do you want, Li Wei?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Money? Or do you want me to get on my knees and beg for forgiveness?" I calmly sat down opposite him. "I don't need your money, and your apology is worthless to me now." I placed my tablet on the table, turning the screen towards him. This time, I didn't just show the graph. I had prepared a full presentation. "This is not an accusation," I began, my voice as level as if I were presenting a scientific paper. "This is a presentation of data. Fact number 1, the linguistic fingerprint." I swiped through the stylometry graphs, objectively explaining the parameters and the results. He said nothing, but I saw his hands clench into tight fists under the table. Fact number 2, Chen Kai's journals and notes. I displayed the scanned journal pages, the passages from Chen Kai's notebooks that were nearly identical to sections in Echoes of the Past. These are handwritten, and they predate your publications. Fact number 3, a witness. I played a short video clip. It was Chen Ming, sitting in his shop. He didn't say a word. He simply held up one of his father's notebooks, turned to a page with a complex diagram, then held up Zhao Haishan's book, turned to a page with the exact same diagram. He didn't need to speak. The image said everything. I turned off the tablet. The room was silent. I had presented my case. No emotion, no anger, just cold, irrefutable facts. Zhao Haishan looked out the window into the Shanghai night. It was a long time before he spoke, his voice no longer defiant, only bitter. "Do you have any idea how brilliant Chen Kai was?" he asked, as if speaking to himself. "You can't imagine." Ideas flowed from him like a spring. And me? I was just a hard worker. I read a lot, I took careful notes, but I didn't have that spark of genius. I lived in his shadow our entire university life. It was the first time I had ever heard a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "He let me read that manuscript," he continued, "and I knew. It was a masterpiece, something I could never write. Then he died. The manuscript was in my hands. The entire world didn't know it existed. Only me. The temptation was too great." He turned back to look at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than hatred in his eyes. It was curiosity. "Why haven't you published this? You could destroy me instantly." "Because of Anran," I answered simply. "I will never hurt her. But that doesn't mean I will let this lie continue." I pushed a small USB drive across the table towards him. "This contains everything. It's yours." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I will not make any of this public," I said. "In return, you will do 3 things. First, you will immediately withdraw the Poetics of the Southern Song Dynasty manuscript. Tell the publisher you need to review it, or for health reasons, I don't care. It will never be published. Second, you will establish an anonymous trust fund in Chen Kai's name, transfer all profits from the books you wrote into it, and that fund will be given to Chen Ming. It is a debt you must pay. And third," I paused, looking him directly in the eye, "you will never interfere in my and Anran's life again. You will admit to her that you were wrong to accuse me. You don't have to tell her the whole truth, but you must restore my innocence in her eyes." Those were my terms. Not revenge, but restitution. Zhao Haishan looked at the USB drive, then back at me. The endgame had arrived. He was in checkmate. He could knock over the board, but doing so would mean his own self-destruction. He let out a long, slow breath, a breath of utter defeat. He slowly picked up the USB drive. "All right," he said, his voice a whisper. "I agree." The endgame was over. There were no real victors, only a truth that had finally been brought to light, even if only in this small, quiet tea house. I stood up, said nothing more, and walked out, leaving him alone with the fraudulent legacy he was now about to bury with his own hands. I didn't go home right away. I walked along the Bund, letting the cool night breeze blow away the tension that had been building for weeks. I had done the right thing. I knew it. But there was no sense of victory, only a lingering sadness. A tragedy had been covered up for 25 years, and uncovering it, even partially, left scars. When I finally returned to the apartment, it was nearly midnight. The living room light was on. Anran was sitting on the sofa, curled up, waiting. She looked up as I entered, her eyes puffy from crying. "Dad called me," she said, her voice hoarse. My heart beat faster. "What did he say?" He said there was a terrible misunderstanding," she recounted, each word a heavy weight. "He said he was under too much stress with the manuscript, that he became paranoid and was wrong to suspect you. He apologized. He asked me to pass his apology on to you." I sat down next to her, but not too close. I needed to give her space. "Was that all?" I asked. Anran shook her head. "Number." There was something different in his voice. An emptiness. He said he was withdrawing the manuscript, that he felt it wasn't worthy anymore. He said he was tired. She looked at me, her eyes filled with confusion. "Wei, what happened? You went to see him tonight, didn't you? What did you do?" This was the moment of truth. I could choose to remain silent, to let her father's partial explanation be the final version. But I owed her more than that. I owed her the entire truth, no matter how painful. "Anran," I began softly, "I'm going to tell you a story about your father and a friend of his named Chen Kai." And I told her everything. About the 2 best friends, about genius and jealousy, about the tragic death and the stolen manuscript, about the linguistic fingerprint, the yellowed notebooks, the son who grew up never knowing his father's true legacy. I didn't speak in an accusatory tone, but simply as a narrator of facts. Anran listened in silence, her face pale. She didn't interrupt, didn't object, She just listened, and I could see a violent struggle happening inside her. The idol of the perfect father she had worshipped her entire life was slowly cracking, then crumbling before her eyes. When I finished, silence enveloped us. She wasn't crying. Her tears seemed to have run dry. She just sat there, staring at a fixed point on the wall. So, his whole life, she whispered, his reputation, the respect, it was all built on a lie. I finished the sentence for her. She turned to look at me. In her eyes, I no longer saw suspicion or anger, only a deep, profound pain and a dawning understanding. "Why didn't you publish it?" she asked. "You had enough proof to destroy him." "I told you," I replied. "I would never hurt you." At that, she finally broke. It wasn't a cry of anger or despair, but a cry of release. She collapsed against my shoulder, and I held her. The wall between us had finally come down. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry I doubted you. I was so blind." "It's not your fault," I comforted her, stroking her hair. "Love can make us blind sometimes." We sat like that for a long time. Outside, Shanghai was still loud and bustling, but inside our apartment, a storm had passed, leaving a fragile peace in its wake. That night, for the first time in weeks, we slept in the same bed again. Anran didn't say anything more. She just held my hand tightly as if she were afraid I would disappear. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. This wound would take time to heal. Her image of her father was shattered, and she would have to learn to accept the real man, a flawed and complex human being. But I also knew we would get through it together. Zhao Haishan's belated confession, however incomplete, had been enough to break the spell. The truth had been spoken, not to the public, but where it mattered most, among those involved. And sometimes that is the truest form of justice. 6 months passed. Life settled into a new normal. Professor Zhao Haishan kept his word. A few weeks after our meeting, the publisher officially announced that the publication of Poetics of the Southern Song Dynasty was cancelled indefinitely due to the author's personal reasons. Not long after, he applied for early retirement, citing declining health. He faded from the academic world quietly, like a star that had burned out. Chen Ming called me a month later. He told me an anonymous charitable foundation had contacted him, offering a large grant to establish the Chen Kai Scholarship to support young researchers in classical literature. Along with it came an unsigned letter with a single line: "A debt has been paid." Ming used part of the money to renovate his shop. The rest he saved to enroll in a master's program in literature, continuing the path his father had started. Justice, in its own way, had found a path. Our relationship with Professor Zhao became distant and formal. Anran still visited him, but the worship in her eyes was gone. All that remained was the affection of a daughter for her aging, fallible father. He never spoke of what had happened, and neither did we. The lie had been buried, and we all agreed not to dig it up. My career also slowly recovered. With the rumors about me fading and Professor Zhao no longer pulling strings in the background, the project with the city government was reactivated. I was invited back as the team lead. This time I accepted with a new confidence. I had faced the most sophisticated manipulation and had won with truth and logic. No whisper could unnerve me now. One spring evening, Anran and I were taking a walk in the park. She stopped and looked at me. "Do you ever regret not publishing everything?" she asked. Chen Kai deserved to be known by the world. I thought for a moment. I used to think about it. But then I realized, a legacy isn't just in books or public recognition. A true legacy is what we leave for the next generation. I took her hand. "Chen Ming is continuing his father's work. That's a living legacy. And we," I smiled, "we are building our own legacy too." Anran smiled back, a truly peaceful smile. "Yes, a legacy built on truth." That evening, I sat in my study, looking at my computer screen. The Veritas algorithm was still there. It was a powerful tool, capable of exposing falsehoods. But through this ordeal, I had learned a more important lesson. Technology can find the truth, but only humans can decide what to do with it. Compassion, forgiveness, and the ability to rebuild from the ashes, those are things no algorithm can program. I hadn't won by destroying Zhao Haishan. I had won on the night Anran collapsed into my arms and we faced the truth together. I had won when Chen Ming decided to use a painful past to build a brighter future. The legacy of lies was over. But from it, several new legacies of truth, love, and hope had begun. And that, to me, was the most complete victory of all. Our new normal felt like walking on thin ice. The surface appeared calm and solid, but underneath, the currents of the past still churned. Anran threw herself back into her work as a cardiologist with an almost fanatical devotion. She became the hospital's strictest adherent to protocol, double-checking every test result and spending hours meticulously explaining conditions to her patients. At first, I thought it was a good sign, that she was reclaiming control after her world had been upended. But then I realized it was an overcorrection. Her father had built his life on a lie, so now she clung to absolute, measurable truth, the kind found on an EKG readout like a life raft. "Today's surgery ran long," she said one evening, her voice tired. Dr. Zhang wanted to use a new technique, but its long-term trial data wasn't convincing enough. I objected. "We can't take risks with what we don't know for sure." I saw the ghost of her father in that rigidity, an absolutism, but applied in the opposite direction. Where he had used intellectualism to hide deceit, Anran was using scientific precision to fight against any possibility of ambiguity. The first crack appeared on a weekend when we visited her parents. Her mother, Mrs. Mai, was still trying to maintain the facade of a happy family. She bustled around making tea, telling pointless, cheerful anecdotes, and completely ignoring the fact that her husband was now a ghost of himself. Professor Zhao sat in his familiar armchair, staring out at the garden. He wasn't reading, wasn't writing, just staring. His eyes were empty, and when he looked at us, I saw no hatred or remorse, only an infinite weariness. "How have you been, Dad?" Anran asked, her voice a bit stiff. "Fine," he replied. A single word. The conversation died right there. The silence in the room became suffocating. It was in that silence that I saw Anran begin to tremble, a tiny tremor only I could detect. She was struggling to breathe. The play of normalcy her mother was staging was worse than a fiery confrontation. It was a constant reminder that this house was built on a rotten foundation, and everyone was pretending they couldn't feel it shake. We left early. In the car, Anran said nothing. She just stared out the window, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. That night, I woke to a sound from my study. I walked in to find Anran sitting in front of my computer, which she rarely touched. On the screen was the interface for Veritas. She wasn't running the program, just staring at its name and icon. "Anran?" I asked softly. She jumped, turning to face me, her eyes wet with tears. "I was just thinking," she whispered. "It can detect a spoken lie. But can it detect a silent one? Can it measure the weight of things left unsaid?" I came and knelt in front of her. "No," I admitted. "That's when we need a heart, not an algorithm." "My heart is so tired, Wei," she said, her voice breaking. "I go to the hospital and I fight for truth. Then I come visit my parents and I have to live in a play of lies. I feel like I'm being torn in two." The crack had shattered. The ice had broken. I held her, realizing that exposing the lie was only the first step. Learning to live with the broken pieces of the truth was the real battle. And it was a battle we would have to fight together, every single day. The Lunar New Year arrived, bringing with it an unavoidable pressure. The family reunion dinner. Anran's mother had called, her voice pleading, saying it might be the last New Year the whole family could spend together, given Professor Zhao's declining health. It was an invitation we couldn't refuse. We entered the familiar house, the stage for the downfall of an icon. The fragrant smell of food couldn't mask the heavy atmosphere. Anran's younger brother, Xiong, and his wife were already there. They knew a part of the story, that there had been a huge misunderstanding, but not the bitter whole truth. Their ignorance created a painful contrast to what we were enduring. Professor Zhao sat at the head of the table, but he was a ghost at his own feast. He had lost weight, and his hands trembled as he held his chopsticks. He didn't speak, just nodded weakly when someone spoke to him. The once brilliant, eloquent professor was now a quiet, broken old man. Mrs. Mai, Anran's mother, tried her best to fill the silence. She constantly served food to everyone, told forced jokes, and asked Xiong about his work with a false enthusiasm. She acted as if everything were fine, as if the man sitting there wasn't a person who had been stripped of his soul. It was this denial that Anran could no longer bear. "Mom, stop it," Anran said suddenly, putting down her chopsticks. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the pretense like a knife. "Mrs. Mai froze, a smile fixed on her face. "What are you talking about, Anran?" "This cheerfulness. This play," Anran said, looking directly at her mother. "We can't keep pretending anymore. Dad is not okay. None of us are." Xiong and his wife exchanged confused glances. "Sis, what's wrong?" Xiong asked. "What's wrong?" Anran let out a bitter laugh. "Ask our father. Ask him about his legacy. Ask him about the books that made his name." Professor Zhao lifted his head. For the first time all evening, a flicker of something appeared in his empty eyes. It was panic. "Anran, don't," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why not?" Anran turned to her father, her voice trembling with pent-up emotion. "You've been silent for 6 months. I've been silent. I've tried. But I can't breathe in this house anymore. Your silence, Mom's pretense, it's killing me." Mrs. Mai started to cry. "Anran, how can you talk to your father like that? He's sick." "He's not just sick in his body, Mom." Anran stood up, tears finally streaming down her face. "His soul has been rotting for a long time. And you knew. You've always known, haven't you?" The question hung in the air. Mrs. Mai didn't answer, just sobbed. In that moment, I realized an even more terrible truth. Perhaps she didn't just know. Perhaps she was a silent accomplice, having enjoyed the fruits of that lie for all those years. Anran looked at her father one last time. "I love you, Dad," she said, her voice breaking, "but I can't respect the man you became." With that, she turned and ran out of the house. I quickly stood up to follow her. The reunion dinner was in ruins. The ghost of the past had returned, not to claim a debt, but to show everyone that unhealed wounds never disappear. They just fester beneath the surface, waiting for a moment of weakness to burst. After the explosive New Year's dinner, Anran fell into a period of depression. She still went to work, still performed her duties as a doctor, but at home, she became quiet and distant. She had shattered her family's false silence, but the price was the complete breakdown of her relationship with her mother and a gnawing, relentless guilt. While I was trying to help her navigate this, a new project came to me at the Institute. A major pharmaceutical corporation suspected one of its top researchers of stealing data on a breakthrough drug and selling it to a competitor. They wanted me to use my data and behavioral analysis tools to find proof. As I read the case file, an eerie sense of déjà vu washed over me. Intellectual property again. Betrayal from a trusted individual again. The only difference was, this time, I wasn't the victim. I was the arbiter. I began my work, analyzing emails, server access logs, and communication patterns of the suspected researcher. The initial data showed alarming signs. Database access late at night, encrypted emails sent to a personal address, a large sum of money suddenly appearing in his bank account. Logically, the case seemed clear-cut. Veritas, if applied, would likely have yielded a 99% probability of guilt. But I hesitated. The image of Zhao Haishan, a broken man, haunted me. I had defeated him with data, with irrefutable truth. But seeing the aftermath, a shattered family, a man who had lost his reason for living, made me question things. Is absolute truth always the best answer? I decided to do something I would never have done before. I sought the human element before drawing a final conclusion. I requested a private meeting with the researcher, a man in his 50s named Mr. Chen, who had a weary face. Instead of confronting him with the evidence I had, I began by asking about his work. He spoke of his long years in the lab, of his passion for finding a drug that could save thousands of lives. As he spoke, I saw a contradiction. His voice was filled with enthusiasm, but his body language screamed desperation. "Something is troubling you, isn't it?" I asked directly. He froze, then sighed. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," I said. And then, the story poured out. His daughter had a rare, life-threatening illness that required an incredibly expensive surgery abroad. The corporation had refused to help. He had dedicated his life to them, but when he needed them most, they turned their backs. "I didn't sell the whole formula," he confessed, his voice trembling. "I only sold a minor piece of data, just enough to get the money to save my daughter. I know it was wrong, but what was I supposed to do? Watch her die?" I sat in silence. The data said he was a thief, but my heart said he was a desperate father. I thought of Chen Ming, who grew up without a father. I thought of Anran, who had a father but lost his image, family, legacy. These themes kept returning to haunt me. I went back to the Institute and wrote my report. It was highly unusual. I presented all the data that indicated Mr. Chen's wrongdoing. But in the conclusion, I added a new section: context and motive. I told his story, not judgmentally, but simply presenting the facts of his circumstances. I proposed a solution. Instead of criminal prosecution, offer him the chance to work to pay back the monetary equivalent of the damage, and I also recommended that the corporation review its policies on employee support in emergencies. It was a huge professional risk, but I knew I had to do it. Veritas had taught me how to find the truth. But Zhao Haishan and Anran had taught me that truth needs to be tempered with compassion. The echo of Veritas in my head was no longer cold probability numbers, but a reminder that behind every data point lies a human story. A year after the disastrous New Year's dinner, we received a frantic call from Mrs. Mai. Professor Zhao had collapsed. He had suffered a massive stroke. We rushed to the hospital. It was the same hospital where Anran worked. She immediately slipped into her role as a doctor, pushing aside all personal feelings to consult with her colleagues about her father's condition. But as we stood by his bedside, watching him lie there, motionless, eyes closed, connected to a web of machines, I saw her shoulders shake. Whatever he had done, he was still her father. His condition was dire. He was paralyzed on one side and had lost the ability to speak. He could only communicate by blinking his eyes. The following days were a long, helpless vigil. Mrs. Mai was a wreck. Xiang and his wife were also there. The family, though broken, was pulled back together by tragedy. One afternoon, when only Anran and I were in the room, Professor Zhao's eyes suddenly opened. He stared intently at Anran. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were now filled with a desperate urgency. He tried to move his good hand, pointing towards the bedside table. Anran understood. She opened the drawer and found a small single key. "What is this for, Dad?" she asked. He looked at me, then back at her, and blinked twice. It was the signal they had agreed upon for yes. He wanted me to go with her. That night, we returned to the old villa. The house was silent and cold. Anran used the key to unlock an old wooden chest in her father's study, a chest she had never seen him open. Inside there was no money or valuables, only stacks of manuscripts. On top was a neatly clipped set of pages. The cover page read, Chen Kai, a biography. The author, Zhao Haishan. Beneath it was a much thicker, yellowed manuscript. Its cover read, Poetics of the Southern Song Dynasty. The author, Chen Kai. Anran's hands trembled as she picked up the biography. She began to read. It was not an academic work, it was a confession. Zhao Haishan, in his simplest, most unadorned prose, the style that was his before he stole his friend's soul, told the story of their friendship. He wrote of Chen Kai's extraordinary talent, of his own admiration and his consuming jealousy. He didn't excuse his actions, merely stated the truth of the temptation and the guilt that had followed him his entire life. "I have lived a borrowed life," he wrote on the final page. "The legacy the world knows is not mine. My only true legacy is my silence and my guilt. I return this manuscript to its rightful owner. And I write this biography, not for forgiveness, but so that the truth, however late, may be spoken once." Anran sank to the floor, clutching the two manuscripts, and wept. This was it, the confession she had been waiting for. Not a forced apology, but a final act of redemption, done in silence, on the doorstep of death. He couldn't speak, but he had left one final manuscript, the only truly honest one of his career. I sat down beside her and held her. In the dusty study of a scholar who had lived a lie, we had finally found the complete truth. It didn't come in the way we expected, but it had come. A legacy had been returned to its owner, and a soul, perhaps, had finally found some peace before its departure. Professor Zhao Haishan passed away 3 days later. The funeral was a quiet affair, attended only by family and a few close friends. There were no grand eulogies praising his illustrious career, only a quiet grief for a husband and a father. After the funeral, we sat down together, myself, Anran, Xiang, and Chen Ming, whom we had invited to Shanghai. Anran placed the two manuscripts on the table. She told her brother the entire story. Xiang was stunned, but in the end he accepted the truth. The question now was, what to do with them? "We should publish them," Xiang said immediately. "Publish Mr. Chen's work, and Dad's biography. Let everyone know the truth." "I agree," said Chen Ming, his voice emotional as he looked at his father's legacy. "My father deserves the recognition." But Anran shook her head. "I don't think so. At least, not that way." We all looked at her in surprise. "If we simply publish them now," she explained, "it will become a scandal. People will only focus on the deception, the betrayal. My father's name will be dragged through the mud, and Mr. Chen Kai's name will forever be tied to that tragedy. That's not how you honor a genius." She looked at Chen Ming. "Your father's legacy isn't a sad story. It's a great work. It deserves to be presented with the utmost respect." Then she turned to me. "And my father's legacy, even though he lived a lie, his final act was an attempt to make things right. I don't want that act to be buried in a scandal." I understood her. She had found forgiveness, not to erase the sin, but to move forward. "So what's the plan?" I asked. Anran said, placing her hand on the manuscripts, will work on this together. Chen Ming, as the heir, you will be the chief editor. Li Wei and I will help. We won't just publish Mr. Chen Kai's work. We will edit it carefully, add annotations, supplement it with new research. We will make it the most complete and brilliant academic publication it can be. And the biography? Xiong asked. It will be the foreword, Anran said. Not a sensational confession, but a part of the story. The story of a complex friendship, of genius and tragedy. We will publish it not to condemn one man, but to honor two, and to offer a profound lesson to future generations. It was a brilliant plan, one that sought not revenge or glory, but healing and understanding. In the months that followed, we began our work. Our apartment transformed into an editorial office. Chen Ming moved to Shanghai for his graduate studies, and every weekend, he would come over to work with us. Grief was slowly replaced by a shared passion. We were writing a new chapter together, one that had never existed before. One afternoon, while sorting through notes, Anran suddenly paused and placed a hand on her stomach. She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw a radiant joy I hadn't seen in a very long time. Wei, she whispered, I think our family is about to have a new legacy. I went to her side and held her. Looking at the manuscript pages on the table, and then into my wife's sparkling eyes, I realized something. A true legacy doesn't lie in dusty books or names carved in stone. It lies in the stories we tell, the truths we dare to face, and the love we pass on. The legacy of lies was over. A legacy of truth, love, and hope was just beginning. And that was the best chapter we would ever write together.